With loyal audiences, I'd rather have 1,000 listeners who are super loyal to my show and 10,000 that have me on maybe in the background or don't really listen to the podcast.
This is Who's This For, a communicators podcast. Each week I talk with writers, musicians, media makers, and more to get a glimpse at how they craft messages that connect. And now, here's the show. Well, thank you for listening and watching Who's This For? My name's Scott Morfitt, and I am beyond grateful to have my guest here today. I'm grateful for every guest. I'm beyond grateful for every guest. So if you're other guests listening, I'm grateful for you too. But I'm so grateful to have Matty Staudt with me today. How's it going, Matty?
Good. Good to see you, Scott.
Good to see you too. So I ask every guest at the start of this, do you want to give the audience just a little quick CV or your background so they can know a little bit about you?
Sure. I started in radio when I was 16 years old in West Virginia and worked my way through college and then made my way to DC where I produced the G. Gordon Liddy show, and then to New York City where I produced the morning show at WNEW, eventually ending up in San Francisco where I did mornings at Alice Radio, where I'm back at, which I'll mention that in a second. But about 18 years ago, I left radio to co-found the company Stitcher. I saw that radio was changing and I didn't like it. And I really thought the podcasting had something to offer. We were way early, probably too early at Stitcher. After Stitcher, I started the first podcast production program in the United States at the Academy of Art University. I then went on to iHeartRadio, where I co-founded the iHeartRadio Podcast Network. And I founded my own company, James Truth Media, working pilot production and branded podcasts. I'm a board of governor for the Podcast Academy and currently am a managing director at Creator X, as well as doing mornings again at Alice Radio.
Amazing. So my niece, as I was studying for this, had one question I need to ask you about. She requested, this is my crowdsourced question. You were also a character in the movie Cars. How did that happen?
Yeah, so John Lasseter would listen to our show every day, and he was a fan. And he asked if we would come with some stuff for this new movie he was doing. And we didn't really know much about the movie. You go to Pixar and you do a lot of lines. And then you just kind of hope that you make your way into the movie. And I was lucky that my car was in the movie. I even got to, hold on, I'll show you. Even had a little, I even made it to the toy line. I got my own toy. So that was pretty cool. And we had no idea that the movie would be such a big cultural phenomenon that it is, but it's probably the coolest thing I've ever done.
I love it. And I gotta say, I love that Toy Matty has a boom mic. That is,
yes, I'm an guy, even in cars. Yeah.
That's amazing. This is something I've been wondering about kind of at the outset with this, talking to someone who's been in both broadcast media and then in podcasts. But in broadcast media, you tend to go as broad as possible, right? When you're a morning show host, you tend to make things as easy and palatable as possible. What did you find originally going into podcasts? How did it change you going into more of a niche thing?
I enjoyed the fact that I didn't have constraints that you have in broadcast. You see constraints, program directors who think that they know how to do the job and telling you what to do. I also like that it was a place for niche, that when we started podcasting, this is 18 years ago, was very, very early days of podcasting. Most of the podcasts were very niche. In fact, most of the podcasts were about Mac computers because the only people listening to podcasts were people who were really into Apple.
Those pods.
Yeah, because we were before the iPhone even, Stitcher came out the year before the iPhone. And then we were the first iPhone app for podcasting. And back then we didn't even use podcasting had such a bad connotation to people that we didn't even say it. We always said radio on demand. It was it was a long time. I mean, to see the industry where it's at today and where we were 18 years ago, it's phenomenal. It definitely was for people who just enjoyed doing the art. There wasn't much money to be made, and either you liked talking and you liked hosting shows, and you did it for that. You weren't doing it for the mic for sure.
But you created the financial means for people to do it for the money. So I think that's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, the industry, it's funny, my new company is now focused on small and medium-sized content creators to bring them brand deals. It's Creator X. And that was important to me because I've watched the industry go from, a little more democratic about ads. A lot of them were CPA ads, so that as long as if you had a strong audience and they responded to the promo codes and things like that, you can make money. It's now become a place where only the top 2% of the podcast get any of the ad deals because they're just looking at numbers. They're not looking at content. They're not looking at engagement. They're not looking at any of that. So we've been finding and bringing in brands who want to try out smaller podcasts because of the loyal audiences and all that comes with strong audience rather than a large audience.
That's really interesting. Why are the brands liking the smaller audiences?
It's a great place for brands who have not been in podcasting before to test. But with loyal audiences, I'd rather have 1,000 listeners who are super loyal to my show than 10,000 that have me on maybe in the background or don't really listen to the whole podcast. Podcast advertising works because people trust the hosts. It's always been the way. We've always that's why it's always been so successful is that unlike commercials that you hear on the radio or on TV, podcast ads are done by the hosts and they are trustworthy people to the people who listen to them. Therefore, they're more likely to act on an ad because they're not only just into the product, but they're also wanting to support the show.
Gotcha. Well, that actually was going to be that is my next question. In podcasts in general, I think this one's a little meta, but do you think people find host read ads a little more trustworthy than like pre-roll commercials?
Oh, 100%. Um, we've gotten to a point now where people are relying on programmatic ads and the agencies for some reason put in radio ads. And it's like, that's not what people who listen to podcasts respond to. They don't want the radio. They want, they want to hear from the host. They want the host to be the person telling them about the product and not just some promotion.
That's cool. One thing I like to ask people a lot in this show, because it's called Who's This For, is about the audiences they're reaching. And I know there isn't one run of the mill podcast listener in 2026, but with the different types of shows that you're creating and you're involved with, do you find that there's a common thread in people that listen to podcasts?
Yeah. I mean, podcasts are companionship. In podcasts, excuse me, there's a couple different kind of audiences. The audiences that like the interview podcasts and celebrity podcasts, things like that, they like the person. They're really into the person. And then there's other folks like me who really like immersive. I like storytelling podcasts, narrative podcasts. Those are the ones that I listen to. And that's because it's like a book. You get into it and you're in it. Your head's in it. Like for me, I've got all kinds of you have ADHD and bipolar, and my brain can go in crazy directions. But when I'm listening to a podcast, it's very much focused on the world that I'm listening to, and I'm painting pictures with my mind. And I think that is an escape for a lot of people. Podcasting is an escape and a companion. I would say the two things that the reason why people like.
So that's really cool that when you're listening to narrative podcasts, you can kind of shut off that like producer brain and you're not hearing like, oh, music bed and sound on tape. And you just hear it as a thing then.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a good narrative podcast is a joy to listen to. It
Yeah.
really is, and it really takes you somewhere and makes you think. I mean, there's nothing I like more than being in my car on a big long road trip and listening to a podcast. Like the time flies by for me. Yeah.
Pardon my ignorance on this one, but have you hosted any narrative podcasts?
No, I've produced some. I mean, we had quite a few on my network, and I produced The Opportunist now. I also produced Appalachian Mysteria, which was a true crime podcast. But I have not done any of that myself as far as being on the mic end of things. I've not voiced any. It's not something I wouldn't mind doing. I just haven't. I'm just always on the other side of things.
To me, it's a little bit of a different personality to that narrator. I've always wanted to nail it down, but for me, again, I'm always like, okay, I gotta talk slow and talk about things like they're really important, but I don't then I start laughing when I try to do narrations.
Yeah. Yeah. It's,
That's
it's,
just me.
it's script reading's an art. And I think it's, there's some people that just really can read a script and bring it to life, and some people don't. It's the same thing with hosting a podcast and being an interviewer. Like some people can do it, and some people try, and they're just not very.
Do you see a different experience when you're hosting radio versus when you're a podcast host?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, my radio show, I'm lucky. It's been around for 30 years, and it is very much focused on what we're into. Where why people listen. They like the characters on the show. They like the host. They like me inside characters. But it is a grind. And so is, when you're producing a good podcast, it's a grind too. And I think it's a reason a lot of people start and stop because they don't realize, oh my God, I have guests, I'm going to edit, it's like, I got to do this, we got money. There's a lot of things where radio, at least for the most part, I can go in the morning really early. And when I'm done, it's done for the day. Like I put it to bed for the day. Of course, you do prep in the afternoon, but for the most part, it's different than podcasts, which that you can get picked and do all kinds of things where it's for a week before you think it's ready.
I've done both, and yeah, I mean, the biggest difference for me is, like, in radio, I kick myself when I read something wrong a little bit, but other than that, I gotta drive on, so it's just cool to hear how other people handle the craft.
Yeah, I tell that, especially people who are starting out. Remember, it's not surgery. I had a boss one day. I was just upset about the show. I was taking it very seriously, and he said, "Listen, if the world was a mall, you work at the toy store. Don't ever forget." And I try to remind myself that all the time. I work at the toy store. I'm not breaking anything. If we have a bad day, we have a bad day. It's okay.
I love that, and I'm gonna run this by you because this is advice I've given kids in the past for doing radio. I've always said, pretend like you're just talking to one person because that's all it is. That's kind of the basis of this show is I believe that when you're talking, whether your art hits one person, 10 people, a million, it still is a one-on-one basis and a connection. Does that ring true?
Well, yeah, I always say that uh, podcasts have three elements of the use of podcasts: entertainment, education, and empathy. So, podcast has got to be entertaining. It's got to be you learn something no matter what podcast you listen to. You're always going to learn something, and then empathy, and that's where it's got to feel your audience, talk to your audience, and that's that one-on-one.
That's fantastic. One thing I've thought about, and we kind of talked about it about like the top earning percentage, but what do you tell people? Because sometimes I have people talk to me about doing podcasts where they're like, "Hey, can you help me become famous with this podcast?" And I always feel inadequate if they're not famous already because I don't know that. But do you believe that, like in 2026, a podcast alone, just on that merit, has the ability to raise people?
I think it's hard. It really is hard. I mean, you have to be willing to put some money into promotion, and you can't expect people just to find a podcast and come to it. It just doesn't work that way. People hustle and they get audiences. I have had clients come to me and they want to make money, they want to be famous, and I not take that money. I'm just that's not where you start this. You start it because you're passionate, you go for a team. That's the only way you'll get to those other things. You can't just do it. Uh, It's like, I mean, we've all seen those. I don't know. I've got friends that are on Instagram that are trying so hard to be creators and influencers, and it's like it's not working for them. It's not as easy as it looks. You can work really hard to build those audiences up. But just taking social media an example, yeah, all the time people get viral and something happens, and next thing you know, they're famous. I mean, look at that hot Chewy girl. She did said one thing, and next thing you know, she's got a podcast contract that would make all of our heads, and it's just crazy. Yeah, I mean, it's just I don't think that's a good example, but it is definitely there. What happens?
Oh, that one floored me though. Like, honestly, I guess I hadn't thought about that in about a year because I think that's a year old, but like, that is so crazy that someone's person on the street interview where they said something a little dirty and they were a little cute somehow like skyrocketed them to popularity. That was something like I had never ever seen in my life.
Yeah, it was crazy.
I guess one thing that for people that are getting into this for the love of the game, since you've seen so many people do this, what are your first few like organizational tips when people are like, "Hey, I got a podcast and I think I can do 8, 9 episodes." What do you generally tell them when they're starting?
First thing is to build a persona and know who your audience is and know who you're talking to. That's something most people don't do. They just start doing it and they're not thinking about the audience. So I have a picture of the person and character traits and what movies they like and what other podcasts they listen to. I get very deep into a persona, and then it's easier to create content because you can run it through this filter. Okay, Kate is my ideal listener, and he lives in Moran, and Kate has kids, and he goes to soccer practice and drives a Volvo and likes Bachelor and Bachelorette and all this stuff. And then as I'm thinking of content, I'm like, "Hey, well, Kate like that. Okay, well, that's something that Kate would like. Would Kate like this? No, Kate wouldn't like that. So don't do that." I think that's for me the start. Coming up with a mission statement for your show, and it just that's one line so that anybody asks what the show is, and you got to. This is what my show is about, and also knowing the time investment and being okay with it. And I think a lot of people, especially I've been counting this with podcasts that have started for faculty celebrities, they didn't realize the time. They just thought, oh, I'll just it'll be an hour a week, and that'll be that. Where it's a lot more prepping and you're helping people producing your own stuff, editing, uploading, getting show descriptions and writing show notes. And, it's a lot of stuff. So that's another big one for me. It's making sure they understand this is a job. It's not, I mean, if you don't want it to be a job and you just want to go and talk and do whatever you want, don't do that. That's fine. But, don't also have unrealistic expectations of people.
I love that. Question for you. What's your typical for your show persona doing while they listen to a podcast?
Well, it depends on the show. It really does. I mean, well, I just told you the persona for my radio show. That's
Oh,
who
okay.
my radio show. That's that, and that's who I keep up. It depends on the show. I mean, yeah, it depends on the show, the hosts, and everything. And that's why it's important to build out a persona, other than just some broad, like, well, everybody will listen. No, they won't. No, who's the exact person you want to target your audience? I teach a podcast production class, and their midterm is a PowerPoint on their audience, on their content, on their marketability. I make them do that before they record one episode.
Oh, that's great that you're building so much structure to that. I've found I lived in a community where there was a ton of creatives for years, and it was a small enough town that we were kind of able to do everything. Like I got to start a radio station in that type of town, which was awesome. But a lot of times I find when we're allowed a complete palette of creativity, we forget that like what's the structure? Who's this for? How is this going to make a buck? And I think that's so good that you bring that perspective to people as they're thinking about things.
Yeah, it's important.
Great. This has been an
Mhm.
amazing chat, and I've appreciated really that peek behind the veil. That's what I try to do in every episode of this show. Do you have anything that you like to tell people who think about creativity in general? Maybe not just about podcasts, but just creators. Do you have anything you like to share with them?
Yeah, I'm stealing a little bit of this from Ira Glass, but he has a thing about creativity. And the thing to remember is we all get into this art form that we get into because we have good taste. We really have good taste in it. But when we start doing it, we realize we're not very, and most people quit. And that's the thing. Don't quit. Everyone sucks when they start. It gets better. You'll get that but you won't get better unless you keep doing it. You do more podcasts. I used to tell people you can't judge a podcast until you've done the episode because sometimes it takes that long before it really all the stuff starts to sink and get into a groove. But yeah, just remember that you're not going to come out of the gates an A plus. You're going to come out it's a C.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we have to win it.
One thing I like from that Ira Glass quote too is how he talks about how people get into this because they have really good taste
Yeah,
and how your own good taste is your enemy when you're starting out because you're like, I'm not good enough at what I like.
yeah, exactly.
It's yeah, thank you. That was such a great insight. You brought up a few things a few golden nuggets today. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott.
I always finish out my podcast by letting the guests sell the stuff they like to sell because that's what I've been told. That call to action wrap up is why I do this. So, what would you like to share with the people out there for them to check it out?
Well, Creator X is a non-exclusive platform. So you sign up for Creator X, start getting brands that reach out to you for advertising. You either take them or you don't. We don't care who else you work with. It's not like like you must only use us. It's not like that. It's real simple and the tech is pretty cool. It's creatorx.io, creatorx.io, or just email me, Matty, at creatorx.io, and I can tell you more about it.
That's so awesome that you created a Creator X. I love anyone that creates opportunities for others. So that's just so rad that you made that.
Yeah. Our whole team has been in podcasting a long time and they've been complaining about this problem.
Great. Maddie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Scott.